Stuart, do you want to come back in?
Just very, very quick kind of reflections on some of those questions. The first one about boundaries that appear not to be there, and the kind of does that show a sort of a security or a strength? I think it needs to be interrogated on a slightly different set of questions. I mean, to get into the EU or NATO, you have to have agreements on your boundaries with any of your neighbours, in the sense that then the countries that are allowed into that are ones that are deemed to be unproblematic in terms of their external borders. But all of those countries still have borders. They just may not be, as John was saying, at the border of the edge of their sovereign territory. The outsourcing of borders as biometric rather than simply lines, a lot of work that's been done around those things. And the questions then of the countries that are external to the EU, to NATO, to Schengen land, whichever one you take, their external border becomes effectively the border of the other countries that are within that area. So that the borders are maybe not visible in certain places doesn't mean that those countries don't still have borders. The second one goes back to Wendy about the walls and identity question, and kind of goes with this complication of the Israeli wall. I think it's really, really important to recognise that if you look at the wall, in the vast majority of places, the people on both sides of the wall are Palestinian. It is not separating Israelis on one side from Palestinians on the other. It is, and I think this is another A.L. Weissman phrase, is it's separating different degrees of occupation. And that's absolutely fundamental to understanding what that wall is doing as a project. So but the other question, and I think I'd be a little bit more critical here than Wendy on the way that the wall is perceived by Israelis. Most Israelis don't see the wall. It's a wall that is somewhere else. If you're in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Beersheba, big Israeli cities, you do not see the wall. It is not part of your everyday routine, and it is something that is over there and is keeping a problem out of your cities. Yes, if you're in Jerusalem, if you're a settler, the wall is part of your everyday routine, but for the vast majority of Israelis, it is external to them. And I think that's fundamental in understanding the mindset and the acceptance of the wall by Israeli civilians. So I think that's an important one. The third one is just a throwaway comment, but I think is actually really interesting. The Latin word territorium, the root of territory, is an incredibly rare word in classical Latin, and I know the instances where it does appear, but it is an extremely rare word in classical Latin. But it actually means the areas outside the walls. It's the agricultural land, it's the cultivated land of the colonies outside of the walls. So you would have a medieval walled town with all of its agricultural land outside of it, and that people would retreat behind the wall for security. But most of the time the territorium, this is going through the classical Latin through into medieval Latin, the territorium is the cultivated land outside of the wall. And I think that's interesting in terms of how we think about territory and walls.
Okay, so just before I do my final thanks, there is some drink. I'm not quite sure what sort of drink it is, but there is drink. And other things associated with the reception outside and downstairs in a couple of minutes. But can I first say thank you so much, first to the two respondents, to Rhea for making us really think about this concept of sovereignty, for Stuart for adding a new concept to my vocabulary, but also for making us think territorially. And in particular to Wendy for her wonderful lecture that stimulated such a great discussion. And thanks to you, the audience, as well, for contributing so well. So thank you to everybody. Yeah. Okay.